The night sky erupted with screeching cries as hundreds of massive winged shapes descended from the clouds. The raiders froze in their tracks, weapons still aimed at Eli's farmhouse. Their leader's eyes widened in terror as the first of the alien raptors landed before him, its obsidian scales gleaming under the twin moons, massive talons digging into the soil. The creature lowered its head, intelligent eyes fixed on the human who had threatened the farm. Behind it, more raptors landed in perfect formation, creating a living barrier between the raiders and Eli's home. The leader of the flock, identifiable by the healed scar across its wing membrane, stepped forward and opened its massive jaws. No one had ever heard these creatures vocalize anything beyond hunting screeches, but now it spoke not in any human language, but in a series of clicks and trills that somehow conveyed a single, unmistakable message. This human is under our protection. Leave now or die. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Eli Morgan wiped sweat from his brow as he surveyed his struggling crops. 5 years on the frontier of Nova Terra, and farming hadn't gotten any easier. The human colony was still young on this alien world, barely 30 years established, and the outpost farmers like him had it worst. His patch of land sat at the very edge of claimed territory, butting right up against the wild expanses that humans had yet to tame or even properly explore. The twin suns were beginning their slow descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across his fields. The irrigation system he'd cobbled together from salvaged parts hummed quietly, distributing precious water to rows of Earth-native crops that he'd genetically modified to survive in Nova Terra's peculiar soil composition. The government issued atmospheric filters on his modest prefab house, worked overtime as they always did during the dry season, keeping the slightly higher oxygen levels inside at a comfortable Earth standard. Eli didn't mind the isolation. After 15 years in the Colonial Defense Force, the quiet of frontier life was a welcome change. Most days, he interacted only with his agricultural drones and the colony's supply runners who came monthly to collect whatever surplus he managed to produce. The nearest neighbor was 50 kilometers away, another ex-military type who preferred solitude to the bustle of the main settlement. As Eli headed back toward his house, a movement in the sky caught his attention. At first, he thought it might be one of the native avians. Most of the flying fauna on Nova Terra resembled pterodactyls from Earth's distant past, though with key biological differences that scientists were still cataloging. But this creature's flight pattern was erratic, wobbling and lurching through the air. Something was wrong. He shaded his eyes against the setting suns and watched as the creature struggled to maintain altitude. Its wingspan was impressive, easily 4 meters from tip to tip, with a body that was sleek and predatory. Eli recognized it as one of the raptorial species that inhabited the mountain ranges to the north. Locals called them skyreavers for their habit of diving at incredible speeds to snatch prey. The creature was clearly injured. As it flew overhead, Eli could see that one wing was damaged, the membrane torn. It managed a few more labored flaps before it faltered and plummeted, disappearing behind the rise about 300 meters from his house. Eli debated with himself. These skyreavers were known to be dangerous, with razor-sharp talons and teeth designed for tearing flesh. The colony's xenobiologists classified them as apex predators to be avoided. But something in him, perhaps the same instinct that had led him to rescue wounded comrades on the battlefield, couldn't just let the creature suffer. With a sigh, he went back to the house and grabbed his medkit, a stunner just in case, and a portable scanner. The twin suns were touching the horizon by the time he crested the rise and spotted the fallen creature. It lay in a crumpled heap, one wing extended awkwardly. As Eli approached, it raised its head and fixed him with intelligent eyes that shone with an amber light. Its scales were primarily obsidian black, with hints of deep blue that caught the fading sunlight. It opened its jaws, revealing rows of needle-like teeth, and emitted a warning screech that sent chills down Eli's spine. "Easy there," Eli said, knowing the creature couldn't understand him but hoping his calm tone might have some effect. "I'm not here to hurt you." The raptor tried to stand, but collapsed back down, clearly weakened from its fall and whatever had damaged its wing in the first place. Eli activated his scanner and slowly moved it over the creature from a safe distance. The readings confirmed what he could see: a severe tear in the wing membrane and signs of dehydration. Otherwise, its vitals seemed stable, if elevated from stress. Eli kept his movements slow and deliberate as he set down the scanner and opened his medkit. The creature watched him warily, its breathing labored. "I'm going to help you," Eli murmured. "But you've got to promise not to tear my face off, deal?" The skyraver made a chirping sound that Eli chose to interpret as agreement, though he kept the stunner within easy reach. Working methodically, Eli prepared a nanogel patch designed for tissue repair. It was meant for human use, but he'd modified similar patches for livestock before. The biological principles weren't that different. The nanites would stimulate cell reproduction and create a temporary scaffold for the healing tissue. The real challenge was applying it. Eli knew he'd have to get close to the injured wing, within striking distance of those talons and teeth. He considered using the stunner first, but that might just traumatize the creature further. "Here goes nothing," he muttered, and began his approach. The raptor hissed as Eli drew near, but seemed too weak to mount a serious defense. With careful movements, Eli extended the nanogel applicator toward the torn wing membrane. The creature flinched but didn't attack. Taking that as permission, Eli quickly applied the gel along the edges of the tear. "This should help with the pain and start the healing process," he explained, backing away once the application was complete. "But you're going to need food and water to recover properly." As if understanding, the raptor's eyes followed him intently. Eli returned to his house and brought back a container of water and some raw protein cubes used for livestock feed. He set these within reach of the creature and stepped back. After a hesitant moment, the raptor stretched its neck forward and sniffed at the offerings. It dipped its snout into the water first, drinking deeply. Then, with surprising delicacy given its fearsome appearance, it began to consume the protein cubes. "I'll check on you tomorrow," Eli said, gathering his equipment. "Try to rest that wing." As Eli walked away, he glanced back over his shoulder. The skyraver had settled into a more comfortable position, its injured wing carefully folded against its body. Its eyes remained fixed on him until he disappeared over the rise. That night, Eli read everything he could find in the colony's database about the skyreavers. The information was limited. They were territorial, hunted in small groups, and possessed remarkable intelligence for non-sentient creatures. Their preferred prey were the herbivorous herd animals that roamed the plains. There were no recorded instances of attacks on humans, though the database recommended caution. The next evening, Eli returned to the spot where he'd left the injured raptor, half expecting it to be gone. But the creature was still there, though it had dragged itself into the shade of a boulder. It seemed more alert today, raising its head as soon as Eli appeared. Over the next 2 weeks, Eli established a routine. Each evening after finishing his farm work, he would bring food and fresh water to the skyraver. He examined the wing regularly, applying fresh nanogel as needed. The tear was healing well, new tissue forming along the scaffold created by the gel. The raptor became increasingly comfortable with his presence. By the end of the first week, it no longer hissed or postured defensively when he approached. By the second week, it would make a peculiar trilling sound when it spotted him coming over the rise, almost like a greeting. Eli found himself talking to the creature during his visits, sharing stories of his day or memories from his military service. It was probably just his imagination, but the skyraver seemed to listen, its head tilted slightly, those intelligent amber eyes tracking his movements. "You know," Eli said one evening as he examined the healing wing, "I should probably give you a name. Can't keep calling you the raptor or the skyraver in my head." The creature made a soft chittering sound. "How about Midnight? For those obsidian scales of yours." The raptor blinked slowly, which Eli took as approval. "Midnight it is then." As the third week began, Midnight was testing its wing, stretching it carefully and making short gliding jumps from the boulder where it had taken up residence. The tear had closed completely, though the membrane still looked thin and vulnerable at the site of the injury. Eli knew the raptor would soon be ready to return to the wild. He felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness at the prospect. He'd grown accustomed to their evening meetings, to the intelligent company that asked nothing of him beyond food and basic care. On the 23rd day, Eli arrived at the boulder to find Midnight perched on top, wings fully extended. The Raptor looked magnificent in the light of the setting suns, its wingspan casting a broad shadow. When it spotted Eli, it emitted the now familiar trill and glided down to land a few meters away. Eli set down the food container. "Looks like you're feeling better." Midnight approached, but instead of going directly for the food as usual, it stopped in front of Eli. Slowly, deliberately, it lowered its head until it was an eye level with him. Those amber eyes studied him intently, and Eli had the uncanny feeling that the creature was trying to memorize his face. Then, with surprising gentleness, Midnight pressed its snout against Eli's outstretched hand, the first time it had initiated physical contact. The scales were smooth and warm to the touch. "You're welcome," Eli said softly, understanding the gesture for what it was: gratitude. Midnight stepped back, consumed the food in a few quick bites, then spread its wings. With a powerful leap, it was airborne, circling once above Eli before turning toward the northern mountains and vanishing into the darkening sky. Eli stood watching long after the Raptor had disappeared from view. He told himself it was better this way. Midnight belonged in the wild, not hanging around a human farm on the edge of the colony. Still, as he walked back to his empty house, he couldn't help feeling the weight of solitude settling back onto his shoulders. Life returned to its previous rhythm. Eli tended his crops, repaired equipment, and sent his harvest to the colony. Days passed with only the agricultural drones for company. Sometimes, he found himself glancing at the northern sky, but there was never any sign of Midnight. 2 months after Midnight's departure, Eli was repairing an irrigation line when his security system pinged an alert. Something large was moving at the edge of his property. He pulled up the feed on his wrist display and was surprised to see Midnight gliding in lazy circles above the area where they'd first met. By the time Eli reached the spot, the Raptor had landed and was waiting, head held high. Eli approached slowly, uncertain of how to proceed. Had Midnight returned because it was injured again? But the creature looked healthy, its wings intact. "Hello there," Eli said. "Didn't expect to see you again." Midnight made the familiar trilling sound and stepped forward. It dropped something from its mouth, a small gleaming object that caught the light of the setting suns. Then, with a screech, it launched itself back into the sky and disappeared once more. Eli bent down to examine what Midnight had left behind. It was a polished stone about the size of his thumb, veined with an iridescent blue mineral he'd never seen before. He turned it over in his palm, wondering at the significance. Was this a gift? A token of some sort? The unexpected visit left Eli with more questions than answers, but also with a strange sense of warmth. Midnight had not forgotten him. A week later, Midnight returned again, this time bringing a different, unusual stone. The visits became a pattern. Every 7 to 10 days, the Raptor would appear, leave some small object, and depart. Sometimes it stayed long enough for Eli to offer it food. Sometimes it merely circled overhead before flying away. The objects were always interesting, unusual stones, fragments of crystallized plant material, once even what appeared to be a fossil embedded in a small rock. Eli created a shelf in his living room to display the growing collection. 6 months into this curious arrangement, the pattern changed. Eli emerged from his house one morning to find not just Midnight, but 2 other skyreavers perched on his storage shed. The newcomers were slightly smaller than Midnight, with scales that tended more toward deep blue than black. Midnight trilled a greeting and glided down to land before Eli. The other 2 Raptors remained on the shed, watching warily. Eli stayed perfectly still, uncertain of their intentions. After a moment of consideration, Midnight turned and made a series of clicking sounds toward the others. One of them responded with a similar pattern of clicks. Then, to Eli's astonishment, both newcomers glided down to land behind Midnight, maintaining a respectful distance from Eli. "Are you introducing me to your friends?" Eli asked incredulously. Midnight stepped forward and repeated the now familiar gesture of pressing its snout against Eli's hand. Then, with a motion of its head, It seemed to invite the other two forward. Hesitantly, they approached, sniffing the air around Eli, but not coming quite close enough to touch. That day marked the beginning of something new. Over the following weeks, Midnight continued to bring different skyreavers to the farm, never more than 3 or 4 at a time. They would circle the property, sometimes landing to accept food from Eli, sometimes merely observing from a distance before departing with Midnight. Eli began to wonder if these visits had a purpose beyond simple curiosity or gratitude. The Raptors seemed to be studying him, and by extension, studying human behavior. It was almost as if Midnight was conducting a careful, deliberate introduction between species. The colony's database had classified skyreavers as non-sentient, but Eli was becoming increasingly convinced that this assessment was flawed. The creatures demonstrated problem-solving abilities, social structures, and communication far more complex than previously documented. He started keeping detailed records of their visits and behaviors, though he shared these observations with no one. The relationship he had with the skyreavers felt too precious, too fragile to expose to outside scrutiny. A year after Midnight's first return, life on the frontier took a dangerous turn. Reports came in of increased raider activity along the colony's borders. These weren't the indigenous species of Nova Terra, but human pirates, opportunists who preyed on isolated settlements, stealing supplies, and sometimes kidnapping colonists for ransom or worse. The Colonial Defense Force increased patrols, but they couldn't be everywhere at once. Many frontier farmers, including Eli, received security upgrades for their properties and weapons to defend themselves if necessary. Eli's military training meant he was better prepared than most, but the news still left him uneasy. The raiders struck for the first time 3 settlements away from Eli's position. They came in the night, overwhelming the farm's defenses before the CDF could respond. By the time help arrived, the place had been stripped of valuables and the family taken. 2 weeks later, another farm was hit. Then another. The raiders were working their way methodically along the frontier, and it was only a matter of time before they reached Eli's position. During this tense period, the skyreavers' visits continued, though Eli noticed a change in their behavior. They seemed more vigilant, often perching on high points around his property and scanning the horizon. Midnight in particular would circle the perimeter of his land before departing, as if conducting a security check. One evening, as Eli was preparing for bed, his security system pinged with multiple alerts. His heart sank. The pattern matched what other farmers had reported just before raider attacks. They were here. Eli grabbed his pulse rifle and activated the farm's defensive systems. The prefab house's walls were reinforced, designed to withstand small arms fire, but he knew the raiders would have heavier weapons. His best hope was to hold them off long enough for the CDF to respond to his distress signal. Through the security feeds, he counted at least 8 raiders approaching from the east, using the terrain for cover. They wore mismatched armor and carried a variety of weapons, some colonial issue, others modified black market designs. Their leader, distinguishable by a red stripe painted across his helmet, gestured for his team to spread out and surround the house. Eli took up position near a reinforced window, using the house's systems to patch into the external speakers. "This is a Colonial Defense Force protected homestead," he announced, his voice carrying across the darkened fields. "I've activated a distress beacon. CDF response teams are on their way. I suggest you leave now." There was a moment of silence, then a harsh laugh came over the comms. "Ex-military, huh?" The raider leader's voice crackled. "That just means you've got better stuff to steal. We know exactly how long it takes the CDF to respond out here. And buddy, you don't have that kind of time. Make this easy on yourself. Open the door, hands up, and maybe we'll just take your stuff, and not your life." Eli didn't respond. Instead, he activated the farm's automated defense turrets. They were non-lethal, designed to incapacitate rather than kill. But the raiders wouldn't know that. The turrets swiveled and fired warning shots, kicking up dirt near the raiders' positions. They scattered, returning fire that impacted harmlessly against the house's reinforced walls. "Have it your way," the leader snarled. "Bring up the heavy." 2 raiders moved forward, carrying what Eli recognized with alarm as a portable breaching charge military grade, likely stolen from a CDF outpost. That would cut through his defenses like paper. Eli aimed carefully and fired at the raiders carrying the charge. But they had already reached cover behind a storage shed. He couldn't get a clear shot. The situation was deteriorating quickly. Eli considered his options. He could make a run for the emergency shelter beneath the house. But that would mean abandoning his property and livelihood. Or he could stand and fight, knowing he was outnumbered and outgunned. As he weighed his choices, an unfamiliar sound cut through the night. A high-pitched, keening call that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The raiders froze. Even Eli found himself holding his breath, something primal in him responding to that sound. Then came an answering call, then another. And another. The sky above the farm suddenly filled with flying shapes, darker than the night itself. Skyreavers, dozens of them, circling and calling to each other. The raiders raised their weapons uncertainly. "What the hell is this?" one of them shouted. The answer came as the first of the raptors plummeted from the sky, talons extended. It struck a raider with tremendous force, knocking him to the ground. Others followed, diving with pinpoint accuracy at the intruders. Eli watched in astonishment as more skyreavers landed in a circle around his house, forming a living barrier. Among them, he recognized Midnight by the faint scarring still visible on its wing membrane. The raptor stood taller than the others, its posture radiating authority. The raider leader emerged from cover, his weapon trained on the nearest Hemel. "Skyraver. Back off, you ugly bastards," he shouted. Midnight stepped forward, fixing the man with its amber gaze. Then, to Eli's shock, the raptor opened its mouth and emitted a series of clicks and trills that sounded eerily deliberate, almost like language. The raider leader's finger tightened on his trigger. "I said back off." What happened next would rewrite everything humans thought they knew about Nova Terra's wildlife. Midnight's head swiveled toward Eli's house. Then back to the raider. It repeated this motion twice more, unmistakably indicating a connection between Eli and itself. Then, with deliberate slowness, it extended one wing toward the raider, revealing the healed scar, the same wing Eli had treated all those months ago. The message was clear even to the raiders. "This human helped me. Now we protect him." The raider leader hesitated, clearly unnerved by the display of intelligence. In that moment of indecision, the skyreavers moved closer, their formation tightening. "Boss," one of the other raiders called, voice shaking. "There's more coming." Indeed, the sky had filled with even more dark shapes. Eli had never seen so many skyreavers in one place. There must have been over 100 now, with more arriving by the minute. The raider leader lowered his weapon, slightly. "What the hell are you?" he asked, the question directed at Midnight. In response, Midnight simply opened its jaws wide, displaying rows of razor-sharp teeth. The threat couldn't have been clearer. "Boss, we should go." Another raider urged. "This isn't worth it." For a tense moment, Eli thought the leader might order an attack anyway, but faced with the overwhelming force of the skyreavers, even he could recognize a lost cause. "Fall back," he ordered finally. "Back to the back. Transports." The raiders retreated slowly, weapons still raised. The skyreavers watched, but made no move to pursue, maintaining their protective circle around Eli's house. When the raiders had disappeared from sight, Eli cautiously stepped outside. The skyreavers parted to create a path for him. At the center of the circle stood Midnight. Eli approached slowly, still processing what he had witnessed. "You came back," he said simply. "You all came back." Midnight lowered its head to Eli's level and made the gentle trilling sound that he had come to associate with greeting. Then, to Eli's amazement, the raptor turned to the others and emitted a complex series of clicks and trills. One by one, the other skyreavers responded with similar vocalizations. "You're talking," Eli whispered. "Actually talking." Midnight turned back to him and blinked slowly, those intelligent amber eyes seeming to say, "We always were. You just didn't know how to listen." The night the skyreavers saved Eli's farm marked a turning point not just for him, but for the entire colony's understanding of Nova Terra's dominant species. When the CDF finally arrived, responding to his distress call, they found Eli sitting calmly on his porch, surrounded by dozens of the creatures that every colonist had been taught to fear and avoid. The initial reaction was panic. The CDF officers raised their weapons, shouting at Eli to get to safety, but Eli refused to move, placing himself between the soldiers and the skyreavers. "Stand down," he called to the officers. "They're not hostile. They just saved my life." Captain Marisa Chen, the squad leader, approached cautiously. "Morgan, have you lost your mind? Those are apex predators." "They're a lot more than that," Eli replied. "And I think it's time we all learned the truth." Convincing the Colonial Authority to reconsider their understanding of skyreavers wasn't easy. Decades of classification as dangerous. Non-sentient wildlife couldn't be overturned overnight. But Eli had evidence: his detailed journals documenting Midnight's behavior, the security footage of the raiders' retreat, and most importantly, the continued presence of the skyreavers themselves. A team of xenobiologists was dispatched to Eli's farm to observe the creatures. They were stunned by what they found. The skyreavers' demonstrated not only tool use and complex social hierarchies, but also symbolic communication and problem-solving abilities, far beyond what had previously been documented. Most significant was their reaction to Eli himself. It was clear to even the most skeptical scientists that the Raptors recognized him specifically and had formed a deliberate alliance with him. The fact that Midnight had brought others to meet him over many months suggested a sophisticated form of cultural exchange, one sentient species carefully introducing itself to another. As weeks passed, more was discovered about skyraver society. They lived primarily in the northern mountains, in colonies carved into cliffside caves. They hunted cooperatively and shared resources within their social groups, which scientists now termed flocks, rather than merely packs. Each flock had distinct vocalizations, effectively dialects of a shared language, and they passed knowledge from generation to generation through direct instruction of the young. Midnight, it turned out, was a flock leader, what the xenobiologists termed in Rye, elder. Its decision to approach Eli after being healed had been deliberate, a calculated risk to establish contact with humans. The gifts it had brought were not random trinkets, but carefully selected items of cultural significance to skyreavers, a traditional way of establishing bonds between flocks. The Colonial Authority was forced to revise its classification of skyreavers. They were reclassified as a sentient indigenous species, with all the protections that designation carried. Hunting them was banned, and their territories were marked as sovereign regions, not available for human expansion. For Eli, the changes were more personal. His farm became a sort of unofficial embassy-neutral ground where humans and skyreavers could interact. Midnight's flock maintained a constant presence, with individuals rotating through as if on a duty roster. They helped protect his crops from native herbivores and warned of approaching storms with greater accuracy than the colony's weather system. In return, Eli shared human knowledge. He set up visual interfaces that allowed the skyreavers to view human writing and images. They seemed particularly interested in maps and diagrams, studying them intently and reproducing the patterns and arrangements of stones around Eli's property. Communication remained challenging. The skyreavers' vocal apparatus was fundamentally different from human speech organs, making it impossible for them to reproduce human language. Similarly, humans couldn't replicate the full range of clicks, trills, and subsonic rumbles that comprised skyraver speech. But a rudimentary translation system began to develop, based on mutually understood symbols and gestures. 6 months after the raider attack, a formal diplomatic mission arrived at Eli's farm. Ambassador Sophia Wu had been assigned to establish official relations with the skyreavers, and Eli's farm had been designated as the meeting point. The day of the meeting, skyreavers gathered in unprecedented numbers. Hundreds circled overhead or perched on every available surface across Eli's property. At the center of it all stood Midnight, flanked by 6 other elders from different flocks. Ambassador Wu approached with a small team of diplomats and xenolinguists. She looked nervous but determined. "Mr. Morgan," she greeted Eli formally. "Thank you for facilitating this historic meeting." Eli nodded. "Ambassador, they've been preparing for this. I think they understand the significance." Wu took a deep breath and approached the gathering of elders. Using the rudimentary translation system that had been developed, she introduced herself and expressed humanity's desire for peaceful coexistence. Midnight stepped forward. With deliberate movements, it extended its wing, displaying the healed scar to the ambassador. Then it turned to Eli and made the now familiar gesture of pressing its snout against his hand. One of the xenolinguists whispered an explanation to the ambassador. It's showing the connection how one human's kindness led to this moment. It's saying that peace is possible because they've already experienced it. Wu nodded in understanding. Please tell them we are honored by their wisdom and courage in reaching out to us. We have much to learn from each other. As the translator conveyed this message through a series of visual symbols and recorded skyraver vocalizations, Midnight made a sound Eli had never heard before. A melodic trill that rose and fell like music. The other skyreavers joined in, creating a haunting harmony that echoed across the fields. What are they doing? Wu asked. Eli smiled. I think they're singing. It's a celebration. The formal treaty between humans and skyreavers was signed 3 months later, the first interspecies diplomatic agreement on Nova Terra. The document recognized both species' rights to their territories and established protocols for communication and mutual aid. It was a landmark achievement in colonial history. For Eli, the treaty brought both recognition and a new purpose. He was officially appointed as the human liaison to the skyreavers, a position that combined diplomat, translator, and cultural interpreter. His farm remained his home, but it also became an interspecies cultural center, where humans could learn about skyreavers and vice versa. Midnight continued its regular visits, though now it came not just as a friend, but as an official representative of its species. The two of them would often sit on Eli's porch as the twin suns set, sharing a companionable silence that transcended the barriers of biology and language. You know, Eli said one evening, when I found you with that torn wing, I never imagined it would lead to all this. I was just trying to help a wounded creature. Midnight made a soft trilling sound and gently nudged Eli's shoulder with its snout. Eli smiled. Yeah, I guess sometimes the smallest acts of kindness change everything. As if in agreement, Midnight spread its wings, the once torn membrane now strong, and Holland launched into the air. It circled once above the farm before being joined by dozens of other skyreavers, their forms dark against the twilight sky. Together they flew in an intricate pattern, a aerial dance performed for an audience of one. Eli watched, filled with a sense of wonder that he hoped would never fade. On this distant world, so far from where humanity had begun, he had found not just a home, but a connection that spanned species. All because, one night long ago, he had chosen compassion over fear. The skyreavers continued their dance as darkness fell, their forms visible only as they passed before the stars. To Eli, they looked like guardians, keeping watch over all that he had built. And in a way, he supposed, that's exactly what they were, guardians born not from obligation or treaty, but from something far more powerful. Mutual respect and an act of kindness repaid 1,000-fold. In the years that followed, the relationship between humans and skyreavers flourished. The cultural exchange program centered at Eli's farm expanded to include regular visits from scientists, diplomats, and curious colonists. Young skyreavers would gather to observe these human visitors, learning about the newcomers to their world, just as human children now learned about skyraver culture in the colony's schools. The benefits of the alliance soon became apparent. Skyreavers provided aerial reconnaissance that helped map unexplored regions of Nova Terra far more efficiently than drones. Their intimate knowledge of the planet's weather patterns improved forecasting, and their awareness of dangerous native fauna helped prevent attacks on human settlements. In return, humans shared medical technology, helping the skyreavers combat diseases that had plagued their species. Agricultural advancements allowed both species to cultivate food more efficiently, reducing competition for resources that might have otherwise led to conflict. 5 years after the treaty signing, the raiders who had once threatened Eli's farm returned to Nova Terra space. But this time, they found themselves facing not just Colonial Defense Forces, but also wings of skyreavers who patrolled alongside human ships. The pirates' attempts to hide in Nova Terra's complex terrain proved futile against the skyreavers' knowledge of every mountain pass and hidden valley. Within a month, the raider threat had been eliminated entirely. Eli's role evolved as well. While he maintained his farm, much of this time was now devoted to teaching. He established a training program for human skyraver liaison officers, sharing the communication techniques and cultural insights he had developed through his friendship with Midnight. Each new liaison was personally introduced to skyraver elders by Midnight itself, continuing the tradition of careful, respectful contact between the species. On the 10th anniversary of the treaty, a formal celebration was held at the colony's central plaza. Representatives from every human settlement and every skyraver flock gathered for the occasion. Eli found himself at the center of the ceremony, alongside Midnight and Ambassador Wu, who had since been promoted to governor. As Governor Wu delivered her address, Eli glanced at Midnight, who stood tall beside him, its obsidian scales gleaming in the sunlight. The skyraver had aged over the years. Subtle changes in its crest, and the deepening blue tones of its wings marked the passage of time. But its amber eyes were as bright and intelligent as ever when they met Eli's gaze. None of this would have been possible, Wu was saying, without the courage and compassion of one farmer who saw beyond appearances, and one skyraver elder who dared to trust a stranger. They remind us that the foundation of peace is not grand treaties or diplomatic protocols, but individual acts of kindness that bridge the divide between different worlds. End quote. After the ceremony, Eli and Midnight retreated from the crowds to a quiet corner of the plaza. The skyraver settled beside him, folding its wings with the careful precision that had always fascinated Eli. 10 years, Eli mused. Hard to believe it's been that long since you showed up with that torn wing. Midnight made a soft sound, then reached out one talon and drew a pattern in the dust. A simple curved line that doubled back on itself, forming a circle that had no beginning and no end. It was a symbol Eli had seen many times in skyraver art, representing the continuity of life and bonds that endure through time. Yes, Eli agreed, understanding the sentiment. Some connections never really break, do they? They just grow stronger. As the twin suns began to set, casting long shadows across Nova Terra, Eli reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He had come to this planet seeking solitude, a place to heal from the wounds of his past. Instead, he had found purpose in connection with a different species, with a new way of seeing the universe, and with a future neither humans nor skyreavers could have imagined on their own. The skyreavers took flight at dusk, hundreds of them filling the darkening sky, their wings creating a living tapestry against the emerging stars. Midnight led them, its powerful wing beats setting the pace as they performed an aerial display that left the human onlookers breathless with wonder. And as night fell completely, the skyreavers formed a protective circle above the colony, their bodies silhouetted against the stars like ancient guardians watching over their charge. Eli knew this display wasn't just for the celebration, it was a message to any who might threaten either species. On Nova Terra, humans no longer stood alone. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new developments in human skyraver relations. 20 years after Eli had first encountered Midnight with its broken wing, Nova Terra had been transformed. Joint settlements were established in previously uninhabitable regions, combining human technology with skyraver knowledge of the terrain. The skyreavers taught humans their sustainable hunting practices and weather prediction methods, while humans introduced medical advances and agricultural techniques that benefited both species. Eli's farm had grown into something far greater than a simple agricultural outpost. Now it served as both a historical site and a thriving research center. Young scientists and diplomats from Earth would begin their Nova Terra assignments with a stay at Morgan Farm, learning the foundations of interspecies communication from the man who had pioneered it. Midnight remained a constant in Eli's life, though its visits became less frequent as its responsibilities as an elder increased. The skyraver now led not just its original flock, but a coalition of flocks that maintained relations with humans. When it did visit, it often brought younger skyreavers, continuing the tradition of careful introduction between the species. On one such visit, during Eli's 60th year on Nova Terra, Midnight arrived with a particularly small skyraver in tow. The younger creature's scales still had the blue-green tinge of adolescence, and it moved with the awkward energy of youth. "Well, who's this?" Eli asked, his voice now roughened with age. Midnight made the familiar trilling sound of greeting, then nudged the younger skyraver forward. With hesitant movements, the young creature approached Eli and extended one wing slightly. Along the membrane was a distinctive pattern of iridescent blue remarkably similar to the pattern on Midnight's wings. "Your offspring?" Eli asked, understanding dawning. Midnight lowered its head in the gesture that humans had come to interpret as affirmation. The younger skyraver chirped softly, studying Eli with curious eyes. Eli smiled and held out his hand, palm up, as he had done countless times with Midnight over the years. After a moment's hesitation, the young skyraver pressed its snout against his palm, mimicking its parents' long-established greeting. "It's an honor to meet you," Eli said softly. Later that evening, as Midnight prepared to depart with its offspring, Eli felt a sudden pang of mortality. He was no longer young, and though medical advances had extended human lifespans considerably, he knew he wouldn't see the full flowering of what he and Midnight had started. As if sensing his thoughts, Midnight approached and gently pressed its forehead against Eli's, a gesture it had never made before. The contact lasted only a moment, but in it, Eli felt a profound communication that transcended their biological differences, a promise that what they had built would endure beyond both their lifetimes. The young skyraver observed this exchange intently, as if being shown something of great importance. Then, with a powerful leap, both skyreavers took to the air, disappearing into the night sky. That night marked a transition in Eli's relationship with Midnight. The visits became ritualistic, occurring precisely at each solstice and equinox. Each time, Midnight would bring its offspring, whom Eli had named Azure, for the distinctive blue patterns on its wings, and sometimes other young skyreavers as well. It became clear that Midnight was training Azure to take its place someday, not just as a flock leader, but as a liaison with humans. The young skyraver proved an apt pupil, quickly mastering the symbolic communication system that had been developed and showing particular interest in human technology. On Eli's 70th birthday, a grand celebration was held at the farm. Representatives from every human settlement on Nova Terra attended, along with diplomatic delegations from Earth itself. The skyreavers marked the occasion as well, with Midnight leading a gathering of elders who performed a rare daylight flight display in Eli's honor. Governor Wu, now in her final turn before retirement, presented Eli with the Nova Terra Medal of Unity, the colony's highest civilian honor. "Eli Morgan," she announced to the gathered crowd, "your compassion toward a wounded creature changed the course of two species' histories. Future generations of both humans and skyreavers will remember your name as the bridge builder, the one who showed us that kindness can transcend the stars themselves." End quote. Eli accepted the medal with humility, but his gaze searched the crowd until he found Midnight perched on a nearby building, Azure at its side. The elder skyraver dipped its head in acknowledgement, and in that gesture, Eli found more meaning than in all the formal honors humanity could bestow. After the ceremony, when the crowds had dispersed, Eli sat alone on his porch, watching the twin suns descend toward the horizon. He heard the soft rustle of wings and turned to find Midnight landing gracefully beside him. In its talons, it carried something wrapped in leaves, a skyraver method of preserving special items. With deliberate movements, Midnight unwrapped the object and presented it to Eli. It was a stone carving, clearly crafted by skyraver talons, depicting a human hand and a skyraver wing touching. The artistry was remarkable, capturing the moment of first contact between their species with profound simplicity. "It's beautiful," Eli murmured, running his fingers over the smooth stone. Midnight trilled softly, then raised its wing to point at the northern mountains, where the main skyraver territories lay. It made a series of clicks and gestures that, after years of familiarity, Eli understood to mean that this carving was one of many, that the story of their friendship was being preserved in skyraver traditions, passed down to future generations. "I'm honored," Eli said, his voice thick with emotion. To think that something so simple as helping a wounded creature could lead to all this. Midnight extended its wing, the healed membrane now bearing additional scars from years of protecting its flock and patrolling alongside humans. The message was clear. Sometimes the deepest wounds create the strongest bonds. As the years continued to pass, Eli's health began to decline. His movements became slower, his days more often spent in quiet contemplation on his porch than in active work around the farm. The research center operated largely under the guidance of younger scientists now, though Eli remained a respected advisor. Midnight seemed to sense the change in him. The skyraver's visits increased in frequency, often arriving unannounced to simply sit in companionable silence beside its old friend. Sometimes it would bring small gifts, interesting stones, or rare flora from the far reaches of Nova Terra, continuing the tradition that had begun so many years before. During Eli's 80th year, a harsh winter descended on the colony. Storm systems battered the settlements, and even with skyraver weather warnings, damage was extensive. Eli's farm, situated on exposed terrain, took the brunt of several blizzards. One particularly fierce night, as wind howled around his reinforced house, Eli woke to find his heating system had failed. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and the emergency backup was responding sluggishly due to ice formation in the external units. Too weak to make the necessary repairs himself, Eli sent out a distress call, knowing that response teams would be stretched thin, dealing with emergencies throughout the colony. He wrapped himself in thermal blankets and prepared for a long, cold wait. But help came from an unexpected quarter. Within an hour of his call, Eli heard the distinctive sound of skyraver wings outside. Through frost-covered windows, he saw not just Midnight, but an entire wing of skyreavers landing around his house, their powerful bodies breaking through the snowdrifts. What happened next demonstrated just how far interspecies cooperation had evolved. The skyreavers worked methodically to clear ice from his heating units, using their natural body heat and precise talons to restore function. Some formed a windbreak around the vulnerable equipment, while others patrolled the perimeter, watching for dangers in the storm. By morning, not only had they repaired his heating system, but they had established a temporary shelter of sorts, a circle of skyreavers taking shifts to protect Eli's home from the worst of the weather until Colonial bow. Repair teams could arrive. When the storm finally cleared 3 days later, Governor Wu herself came to check on Eli, having heard reports of the skyreavers' actions. "Remarkable," she said, watching as the creatures continued their vigil even as the skies cleared. "This goes beyond treaty obligations or diplomatic relations. They genuinely care for you." Eli nodded, his eyes finding Midnight where it perched atop his storage shed, alert despite days without proper rest. "We've come a long way from predator and prey, haven't we?" The incident made headlines throughout the colony and even back on Earth. Skyreavers Save Colony Hero became a story that further cemented the alliance between the species. What few understood, however, was that for Midnight and Eli, it wasn't about heroism or treatise, it was simply what friends did for each other. As Eli entered his 9th decade, the colony prepared for a historic event. The first permanent human settlement in skyraver territory was to be established, a research outpost that would allow scientists to study the rich biodiversity of the northern mountains while respecting skyraver sovereignty. Eli had been instrumental in negotiating the terms, ensuring that human presence would remain limited and non-disruptive. Though his health made travel difficult, Eli insisted on attending the opening ceremony. The journey to the northern mountains was arranged with great Kara, specially designed transport with medical equipment on board, and a wing of skyreavers escorting the entire way. The outpost had been built into the side of a cliff, mimicking skyraver architecture while incorporating human technology. Solar collectors and wind turbines provided power, while waste recycling systems ensured minimal environmental impact. Most importantly, the structure had been designed with open areas where skyreavers could land and interact with human researchers on equal footing. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. Human and skyraver representatives gathered on a wide terrace overlooking a breathtaking valley. Eli, seated due to his frailty, found himself at the center once again, with Midnight standing proudly beside him. Azure, now fully grown and bearing the distinctive markings of an elder in training, approached with a stone tablet clutched in its talons. On it was carved a new symbolic combination of human and skyraver writing that represented the shared future of both species. As Eli accepted this gift, he felt a profound sense of completion. From a simple act of compassion toward a wounded creature had grown something that would outlast him by generations. The legacy he would leave behind was not just in treaties or research centers, but in the fundamental shift in how two intelligent species viewed each other. That night, after the formalities had concluded, Eli sat on the observation deck of the new outpost, wrapped in thermal blankets against the mountain chill. Midnight joined him, settling its aging form carefully beside his chair. "We've had quite a journey, haven't we, old friend?" Eli said softly. Midnight made a gentle trilling sound that Eli had come to recognize as affirmation. Then, with deliberate movements, the skyraver extended its wing and pointed to the stars that were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Eli understood. Both humans and skyreavers had developed myths about the stars, seeing in them patterns and stories that gave meaning to existence. What Midnight was suggesting was that their friendship too had become something legendary, a story that would be told beneath these same stars long after both of them were gone. "Yes," Eli agreed. "I think you're right." They sat in companionable silence as full darkness fell, two aging beings from different worlds who had found in each other something unexpected and precious. Above them, the stars of Nova Terra blazed with a brilliance that Earth's skies could never match, and among them, the first ships from the next wave of human colonists could be seen as distant moving points of light. In the years that followed, Eli's health continued to decline. He moved permanently to the northern outpost, where the mountain air seemed to ease his breathing and where he could continue his work with the skyreavers despite his diminishing strength. Azure began to take on more of Midnight's diplomatic duties, showing a natural aptitude for cross-species communication. On quiet evenings, Eli would often find both Midnight and Azure on his balcony, the elder skyraver seemingly passing on knowledge to its offspring through subtle gestures and vocalizations. Sometimes, Eli would join these sessions, adding his human perspective to what he had come to think of as Midnight's oral history. As his 90th year approached, Eli knew his time was growing short. He had outlived most of his human contemporaries, including Governor Wu, who had passed away peacefully the previous year. Modern medicine could only extend life so far, especially on a frontier world. One crisp autumn morning, as the twin suns cast golden light across the mountain peaks, Eli awoke feeling unusually tired. He managed to make his way to his favorite chair on the balcony, where he could look out over the valley that had become his final home. He must have dozed off, because he awoke to the sound of powerful wings. Opening his eyes, he found Midnight landing carefully on the balcony, accompanied not just by Azure, but by a dozen other skyreavers, each bearing the distinctive markings of elders from different flocks. Through their symbolic communication, Midnight conveyed that they had come for a purpose. The elders formed a semicircle around Eli's chair, and one by one, they approached to touch their foreheads briefly, to his the gesture of deep respect that Midnight had first shown him years ago. Eli understood. Somehow, they knew his time was near, and they had come to honor him in their way. The gesture moved him deeply, this acknowledgement from beings so different from himself, yet connected by bonds of friendship and mutual respect. When the ceremony was complete, the other elders departed, leaving only Midnight and Azure. The elder skyraver settled beside Eli's chair, while Azure took up a watchful position at the edge of the balcony. "Thank you," Eli said simply, his voice barely above a whisper. Midnight made a soft, trilling sound and gently pressed its wing against Eli's hand. They remained that way as the day progressed, watching the twin suns traverse the sky in comfortable silence. Occasionally, researchers from the outpost would check on Eli, providing water or adjusting his blankets, but they respected the quiet communion between the aging human and his skyraver friend. As evening approached, Eli felt a profound weariness settling into his bones. Midnight seemed to sense the change, moving closer and making a soft, melodic sound unlike any Eli had heard before. almost like a lullaby. "It's been an honor," Eli murmured, "to call you friend." Midnight lowered its head, amber eyes fixed on Eli's face with an expression that transcended species barriers, a look of deep understanding and affection. As the twin suns touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Eli Morgan closed his eyes for the final time, his hand still resting against Midnight's wing. His last conscious thought was not of regret or fear, but of profound gratitude for the unexpected journey that had begun with a simple act of compassion toward a wounded creature from another world. Eli's passing was marked by an unprecedented display from the skyreavers. For 3 days and nights, they gathered in the skies above the northern outpost, thousands of them flying in complex patterns that researchers would later identify as a traditional skyraver morning ritual, never before performed for a non-skyraver. Per his wishes, Eli was laid to rest on a mountain overlook facing his original farm in the distance. A simple marker was erected, bearing an inscription in both human language and skyraver symbols. Eli Morgan, bridge builder, friend to all wings. Midnight remained at the site long after the human ceremony concluded, a solitary figure keeping vigil as darkness fell. Azure waited at a respectful distance, understanding that some bonds transcend even death. In the decades that followed, the legacy of Eli and Midnight continued to shape relations between humans and skyreavers. Azure took up its parent's role as primary liaison with the human colony, displaying the same patience and wisdom that had characterized Midnight's approach. New generations of both species grew up with the story of the farmer and the wounded raptor as part of their shared cultural heritage. 50 years after Eli's passing, as Nova Terra celebrated the centennial of human colonization, a grand monument was unveiled in the colony's central plaza. Created by a team of human artisans working alongside skyreavers, using their traditional carving techniques. It depicted a human hand and a skyraver wing, reaching toward each other, a physical embodiment of the connection that had grown from one simple act of kindness. At the dedication ceremony, Azure, now an elder in its own right, led a wing of skyreavers in an aerial display above the monument. Among them flew a younger skyraver with distinctive blue markings similar to Azure's own, representing yet another generation carrying forward the alliance. The official records of Nova Terra's colonization would always include the scientific and diplomatic milestones of human-skyraver relations. But in the oral traditions of the skyreavers and the bedtime stories told to human children, the tale remains simpler and more powerful. Once there was a human who helped a wounded skyraver, asking nothing in return. And when danger came, the skyraver remembered, returning not alone, but with an army of its kind, to protect the one who had shown kindness. It was a reminder that across the vastness of space, on worlds circling distant stars, the capacity for compassion might be the most valuable trait any species could possess, the true foundation upon which lasting peace could be built. And on clear nights, when Nova Terra's twin moons illuminated the landscape, those who looked up might catch glimpses of skyreavers soaring between the stars, keeping watch over the world that two unlikely friends had helped transform from a colony into a home.